Hey, folks, welcome to another episode of Cutter One. I am your host, Jay, just Jay, your resident troublemaker and your resident culture warrior. I hope you're all doing well, you beautiful badasses. I know according to YouTube's analytics, the majority of you guys are in the States. So for those of you that are, Thanksgiving is coming up. You guys are probably going to see this video on Wednesday. So it'll mean that Thanksgiving is tomorrow. So I hope you have plans with your family and your loved ones, and I hope you have a amazing Thanksgiving holiday. For those of you who may be in other countries and you don't celebrate the Thanksgiving holiday, I hope you guys have an awesome freaking rest of the week. I saw this story. It's a couple days old, but it sort of caught my attention. And when I read through it, it sort of got me thinking about a lot of things. And I want to go over it. For those of you who may be concerned, no, it's nothing political. It's about the Rings of Power, or I should say, in my opinion, it's more about Tolkien anyway. But let's go right into it. This is coming from gamerant.com. Okay, the folks over at gamerant.com. All right, it's Rings of Power: Why One Death Goes Against Everything Tolkien Believed. One decision made in Rings of Power seems to go against some of Tolkien's strongest beliefs. Deaths in Middle-earth's world always have a special significance, from the demise of Boromir in The Lord of the Rings, who managed to redeem his ring lust in the final moments by protecting Merry and Pippin from the orc onslaught, to the final episode of The Rings of Power in which Queen Miriel's father passed away, the death of a king that will bring about Numenor's downfall. But one death in the Amazon series took many fans by surprise because it goes against everything that Tolkien believed about honor, redemption, and the worth of sacrificing one's life to create a better world. And, interestingly, this death is that of Finrod, which happens off-screen in the first 10 minutes of the series, and yet it has consequences and impacts that echo across the next 1,000 years of Middle-earth. There are several traits that it takes to make a Tolkien hero, and fighting for what you believe in, even if it means dying for it, is certainly one of them. The most important deaths in Tolkien's stories have a purpose and a meaning because the hero has given the most precious thing that they can give in order to pave the way for a more peaceful future. In Finrod's case, he gives his life in order to defeat Sauron and the growing darkness the evil lord is spreading across the lands. But the reality of his death goes against this message of honor and love that Tolkien believed so deeply in, because it actually has the opposite effect. The Rings of Power series follows Galadriel's journey after her brother's death, and it is a journey of wrath and vengeance, as Finrod's dagger symbolizes. And her own anger and need for justice actually keeps alive the very evil that she spends over 1,000 years hunting down and seeking to destroy. So if anything, Finrod's is not a heroic death as Tolkien would have intended, but a spark that ignites the greatest war Middle-earth has ever known. Several questions have arisen after the close of the Rings of Power about why Sauron was in the Sundering Seas to begin with, but the reason that he gives himself is that he has given up. He tells Galadriel that she made him believe in himself once more because she recognized that our past means nothing when weighed against our future. It is hard to say if this is true or if it is just another manipulative tactic that he uses to coerce her, perhaps to ensure that she doesn't tell the others his secret. But if it is true, and he was on the brink of abandoning his quest for total domination of the world, then Galadriel rekindled an evil desire within him that has disastrous consequences for everyone she holds dear. And all of this because of Finrod's death, because she is driven by the desire to avenge her brother and carry on the mission that he gave his life for, to defeat Sauron. That is the reason that, that her heart and her mind were too restless to go back to Valinor when she had the chance. It was the reason that she jumped off the ship and the reason that she found herself in the Sundering Seas on a raft with the very villain that she had been tracking for half of her life. After Tolkien's own experiences in the First World War, he believed that deaths should be honorable because many soldiers on all sides of the war died to protect the civilians and their families. It was considered a privilege to serve one's country, and that those who did should be held in the utmost esteem and respect. In many ways, this is reflected in Gandalf the Grey being returned to the world by the Valar as Gandalf the White, as recognition of his sacrifice to protect the Fellowship against the Balrog of Moria. This is also essentially what Finrod does in dying to stave off Morgoth and prevent any more damage from being done to the children of Ilúvatar, and Finrod should subsequently have had more of a mark for his death than the wooden monument placed up of him in the courtyard of Lindon. His death should have helped to procure peace and prosperity for the world, but instead it turns his sister into a tyrant who is so consumed by her hatred that she contemplates a possible genocide of the orcs, as well as influencing the decision to forge the 3 elven rings of power. Over 2,000 years after Finrod's death, the Dark Lord is eventually defeated when Frodo, Sam, and Gollum chuck his source of power into the fires of Mount Doom, at which point Sauron regrets forging the One Ring. But there is much pain and suffering along the journey, for the Fellowship involved, for Galadriel herself, and also for the people who lived through the dark times, like the citizens of Rohan and of Gondor. Subsequently, Finrod's death isn't one of valor and triumph, it is one that highlights the futility of war. All right. So let's discuss this a little bit. For starters, and I don't know if it's the person who wrote the article or not, but yeah, they seem to have made a mistake in that they have Finrod dying fighting Sauron. Okay, and they make it seem like they okay. In the show, it's very ambiguous, I guess would be the best way to put it. You kind of get the idea that Finrod's death comes in the war with Morgoth, but they very specifically say he is killed in the war with Sauron. So it's kind of, which if you know the lore, you know that it's very different from what happens in the books. And so that's what I want to discuss, because more than anything else, this article to me shows a very huge missed opportunity, I guess would be the best way to say it, because you had all the makings of a great story right here, and you just sort of chose to use it as a sort of backdrop and as a point of motivation, and nothing more. So according to what Tolkien wrote, okay, and I'm gonna paraphrase here, for you guys that are familiar with, things like the Silmarillion and stuff like that, you'll know what I'm talking about. For those that don't, I'm not gonna go into a whole recitation on the book, but in short, Finrod's a big player. Finrod is a big player amongst the elves, especially during the first and first era and first age, I should say, and things he does have repercussions that literally play out all the way through into the Fourth Age. Okay, and so Finrod, yes, the one thing the show did get right, Finrod is Galadriel's older brother. She has, I think, 2 other additional older brothers, but he is her older brother. Tolkien describes him a little bit differently. He's described as being both fair of looks as well as having golden hair. You kind of get the classic Tolkien elf look from Tolkien's description of it, which is not what how the show portrays him. More sort of Legolas-like with the long flowing hair and stuff like that is sort of like the accepted image of what Finrod would look like. So Finrod participates in what's known as the what's the word I'm looking for? Dagor Bragolach. Okay, the War of Sudden Flame, which was in their initial fight with Morgoth. The elves end up sort of pushing him back within his borders of Angband. And they sort of then lay siege, and I think it's described as being like 400 years. And it's 400 years of relative peace, because basically Morgoth is trapped within his domain in the north, and sort of the elves sort of got him boxed in, right? So Morgoth can't do much of anything. But then with the Dagor Bragolach, Morgoth rushes forth like sudden flame. There's like lava, and it's just like all hell is let loose in an almost literal sense, and deaths by the thousands and stuff like that. And that's what Finrod participates in that. As part of that, he is helped by Barahir, who is a human who was one of the folk of Beorn, who were they were like the humans that refused to leave the area that when Morgoth had sort of, they were there, and so Barahir helps Finrod, and it sets up this like really cool friendship between the two, like the men and elves. Like it's like their first time, like they really bond, right? To the point where Finrod gives Barahir a ring as a token of their newfound like brotherhood, right? It's known as the Ring of Barahir. And the reason why that's important is because ultimately that ring passes down through time. It ends up in Elrond's possession, and then it ends up ultimately with Aragorn. And it's actually, they show it in the Peter Jackson film. You see it's a ring. It's got like a green gem in it. It's the Ring of Barahir, and it signifies the bonds of friendship between men and elves. Anyway, Barahir saves Finrod. Finrod sort of gives him this ring as a sign of their newfound brotherhood. Finrod goes on to found the land of Nargothrond, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, which is this sort of like kingdom that's sort of south and west of Doriath, which is where Thingol is, which is sort of in the central area of Beleriand. It's sort of south and to the west, and it's dug out of this sort of like caves. It's basically like hidden, like it's caves, like sort of similar to Doriath, and it's Finrod and the dwarves of the Blue Mountains are the ones that help him create this, and they have a really good friendship as well. So long story short, Finrod ultimately gets approached by Beren of Beren and Luthien fame. This is some significant time has passed. Finrod is in Nargothrond, and suddenly Beren shows up, and Beren is saying, "Hey, I was just over in Doriath, and Thingol, told me that if I want to marry his daughter, Luthien, I have to get this Silmaril and stuff like that. And since you and my father, had this bond, I'm asking you to help me out here." And he sort of shows the Ring of Barahir. And Finrod goes, and only I think 10 elves go with him. He was trying to rally a whole force, but there were other elves that sort of didn't want him involved, and that sort of tails on into other things with the Sons of Feanor and all that stuff. But long story short, Finrod agrees to help Beren, and they go, and they end up in Tol Sirion, and they end up confronting Sauron, okay, in the Tower of Minas Tirith. And Minas Tirith was a tower founded by Finrod, okay, on the island, this sort of island that would in this river that was Tol Sirion. But the tower was initially known as Minas Tirith, even though that's the name of the city in Gondor later on. But this was the original Minas Tirith, the tower. Long story short, Finrod and Beren and their crew get captured, and ultimately Sauron has his werewolves, they torture and kill all the other elves, but they're not talking. So ultimately, you get down to you have Beren and Finrod are the only ones left, and the Sauron's werewolf goes to kill Beren. But Finrod basically sacrifices himself. Now, it's interesting because within that story, there's this sort of magic battle between Sauron and Finrod, and Finrod holds his own for a bit, but ultimately Sauron, being a Maiar, overpowers him. And it's this like sort of battle of songs, of magic songs. It's really interesting. And long story short, Finrod gives his life for Beren. Okay, and that's the whole tale of Beren and Luthien, and I can do a whole video on just that, if that's something that you guys would be interested in. But long story short, that's how Finrod, quote unquote, dies. However, it is stated that Finrod's spirit goes to the Hall of Mandos, and because his death was deemed he died for such a noble cause, his death came, had such meaning. He's ultimately, very quickly, by comparison, sent back to Tirion, the city of Tirion in Valinor, which is where his home was. So he gets sent back, and he meets the love of his life, which is Amarie. And I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Amarie was her name, and your Tolkien sort of tells us that that's where Finrod ends up. He ends up back in Valinor, in Tirion, back with the love of his life, Amarie. Galadriel would have known all of this, and this is where I think where the showrunners, because they don't have access to this stuff, and they're sort of trying to like fill in the gap here. It sort of, you're losing so much because according to the show, if you haven't read any of this stuff, if any of this is sounding new to you, according to the show, he's just her older brother. They go to fight Sauron. Sauron kills her older brother. She gets pissed off, takes his dagger, and swears that she's going to hunt down Sauron. And that is so not what happens. Not to mention, Galadriel, being an elf herself, would have known that there was a better than 50% chance that her brother is back in Valinor. You know what I mean? So why she would have hopped off the boat into the ocean makes no sense, because if you're wanting to see your brother, you'd probably want to go back to Valinor because he's probably there. And she would have known that. As an elf royalty, an elf princess, she didn't know that. So it just shows how the show squandered such a good opportunity to really like tell some interesting, good stories, and instead they just sort of use it as a motivator for angry Galadriel who wants to go kill and pillage her way across the countryside looking for Sauron. And there's just, it's so much more, so much deeper, so much more in depth, and it's disheartening when you know what the real story of this character is versus you see how the show portrays how unimportant he is, and it just does a whole disservice. It drives home the whole point of they had so much potential and they screwed it up. But anyway, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I know that was the very, very like paraphrased, like abridged version of the story of Finrod. I have thought about going into a more in-depth stuff, but I don't know. What I'm going to do is in the community tab, I'm going to set up a poll whether or not you guys want me, because I've been thinking about potentially going through, and I know this is like a self-inflicting wound here, potentially going through each episode of Rings of Power and comparing the references they make to Tolkien lore and history of Middle Earth, and showing the discrepancies between what the show presents versus what Tolkien actually put out there. So, like in this case with Finrod and his importance to the overall history of Middle Earth versus his non-importance other than as a motivator for Galadriel in the show. So I've been thinking about like maybe go through each episode and show where each episode sort of goes off the rails in terms of diverting from the lore. So I'll put it in the community section if that's something you guys want me to do. If that's something you guys would be interested in. I don't want to do it and people are like, it gets like 15 views because nobody really cares. Because I don't want to waste your time or mine. But it is something that I've been giving some thought to for the past couple of days, wondering if that's a thing that you guys would want me to do. So let me know. I'll put that poll in the community section, and you guys let me know if that's a route you want to go. Also, I did take the advice of the poll I put up about doing more deep dive lore videos. I keep coming up with a format and a way I want to do it, and then completely thinking about it like the next day and completely not liking everything I've come up with and starting from scratch again. So I'm just trying to figure out what's the best way to do a video about the lore and talking strictly about Tolkien lore, or even like Elder Scrolls lore, as I got the flags back there, or maybe Dragonlance lore or Dungeons and Dragons, just like stories that have these like rich, deep histories and lore. I just keep hemming and hawing on the format. So, if you have any ideas or suggestions, put them in the comments below. I'd be interested in hearing what you guys think and what you guys want to see. And as far as that goes, that there are going to be lore videos on that front. I already saw the poll when I had put it out last time. So I know deep dive lore is something that I'm going to be getting into. But I'm also curious if you guys want me to do a run on just like the 8 episodes of Rings of Power and showing where they sort of derail in terms of the lore and the history of Middle Earth and stuff like that. And missed opportunities. Another one I'm going to be doing a video on probably over the holiday weekend, this coming holiday weekend, is how the missed opportunity of the love story between Arondir and Bronwyn in the show, okay, and how that could have and should have been a much bigger, much more substantial event overall within Middle Earth. Because if you know the lore like I do, you know that that's only the elf-human relationship thing has only happened 4 other times, okay? And in 3 of those cases, it was huge change. You could say change the history of Middle Earth with the outcomes of those relationships. So I think that the show is sort of missing out on an opportunity to stick with the lore and show why it's such a big thing for an elf and a human to get together. But anyway, that's for another video. It's something I'm working on. But yeah, let me know what you guys think down in the comments below. What kind of format do you think we should do with the lore videos? Do you want me to do it like some other channels where they just sort of have like floaty pictures going through, almost like a Ed Burns documentary about the lore? Or do you want me to do it more interactive like this? Or maybe we discuss the lore as a live stream? I don't know. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. I'd be interested in seeing that. I will also put that poll in the community section as far as dissecting each of the episodes of the show and seeing where they miss out and opportunities they missed. And other than that, I think that's going to do it for this one. I know I have another video about another aspect of Lord of the Rings, Middle-earth, Tolkien stuff that I'm going to be doing shortly after I do this one. Anyway, I will talk to you guys on the next one. Until then, peace out, you beautiful badasses. I will see you then. Bye.